Hey Duluth, I'm Mayor Roger Reinert, and welcome to another episode of Welcome to Duluth. So just a reminder, in this world we live in where everything seems to be in like 30, 60, 90-second sound bites, this is an opportunity for us to have longer conversations about things that are relevant to our community. And we try to do kind of 4 different categories of things: some core city services, some of the key nonprofit organizations that the city works with, some of the big events that we all know and love within our community, and then also some folks in our community that have really done some amazing, inspiring, or uplifting sorts of things. So let's dive right into this episode. And today I am so thrilled to have with me Geoff Vukelich, and we'll talk a little bit about what Geoff does with us here at the City of Duluth. But this guy has been one of the most interesting people I've met in our 900 plus employees. And we'll tell some stories about things we've already done together because, amongst other things, Geoff is in charge of our snow operations. So, hey Duluth, this should be your most favorite city employee along with the team that he leads, because when you're able to get out and about in the winter, it's because of Geoff and the crew, literally. So welcome, Geoff.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate you making the time to join us. So before we dive into the city stuff, let's learn a little bit about who Geoff is. Yeah. So I know the name Vukelich. It is a good, solid Western Duluth name. Are you of the Duluth Vukelich line, or do you come from somewhere else?
We are and aren't.
Okay.
So we do have some family that's West Duluth. We had a teacher. An uncle of mine was a teacher at Denfeld.
Sure, long time.
Long time. Yep. And we have some people in the range. So family's been in the Duluth area and outside of Duluth since the mid 1800s. My mother's side actually settled kind of on the north side of Wild Rice Lake back in the 1850s.
Oh, wow.
And I was lucky enough to be able to purchase that homestead from them before they passed away. So I have a lot of history in the town.
Yeah.
My grandfather owned a construction company, and he built almost all of the houses between like Stroll Avenue and Pecan Avenue.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when that big development happened, and I want to say that was right after the war, so
Sure.
in the 50s, his construction company built most of those houses in there. So I say I have a lot of rich history. Sometimes I don't talk about it very much because it's just kind of my thing.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of roots here. I nomaded around and went up to Alaska and lived up there for a little bit.
Oh, wow.
I was up in Hovland on the border off grid. I
Sure.
lived up there for a while, and then kind of found my way back here in 2007, 2008, and picked up with the city around that time. And
So did you start in Duluth, or were you a ranger?
no, we started in Duluth.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the homestead that I purchased from my parents, my mother had purchased some land adjacent to that.
Okay.
So that's where I grew up, and then I kind of nomaded around in my 20s, and then came back here in my late 20s, early 30s, and that's where I've kind of been since.
An outdoors kind of guy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're given the look, but I know, knowing you, I know it's actually not just a look. It's
Yeah.
like when you're not doing city stuff, or do we usually find you out in the great outdoors?
100%.
Okay.
So I do, in my past life, I raced sled dogs for a vast majority of my younger life. So that was a big portion of mine. So
Okay.
with that, we also guided for fish. So
Okay.
we did summer guiding and winter guiding. So we still do that now. So I have I enjoy fishing a lot, fly fishing especially, conventional. And then just being outside and outdoors is the one thing that brings me peace and tranquility, both physically and emotionally.
Yes. So how did we go from outdoors and fishing and sled dogs to streets and maintenance and plowing? Like what brought you to the city of Duluth?
Yeah, great question. So for me personally, I don't like to say unfortunately, I like to say fortunately. Fortunately, the city of Duluth offers great benefits. And at the time, I didn't have anything, and I was
Sure.
struggling to make ends meet. I needed some health insurance, and at the time, I had a skill, and I applied. And
Just one.
Just one. Not only one skill. I try to keep it.
That's not true.
I try to keep it easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I always like to be genuinely honest with people, and that is the reason why I came here. Was I knew I could get some health insurance, and I could potentially provide for myself and my pets. And that's kind of what brought me here. And then as I've kind of been through my career here in 20 years, I've been able to really see the changes within Duluth and the Duluth system. And any Duluth employee that I would say has been here for 20 years has seen steady upward progress that the city has made. There may be people that would like to debate that.
Sure.
But from somebody who's been in the town and also been in the government for 20 years, I can say we have made leaps and bounds to where we were. There's still struggles we deal with, but overall, like, we're in a way better spot than we were, and
Awesome.
hopefully we can just continue that. But that's honestly what it was. I came here, it was a maintenance worker job when I started, so it was
Okay.
basically just a laborer.
Yeah.
I built houses. Like I said earlier, my father and his father were in the construction company, so earth moving construction has always been in my blood. So I came here kind of just looking for a job and some insurance, and I've just kind of moved up through the ranks over the last 20 years into the operations coordinator role that I am in now.
So before we dive into that for a minute, so are you at the 20-year mark?
Yeah, I think this year's 20 years for me.
Dang.
Yeah, it's kind of
Okay, we gotta
scary.
celebrate.
Or 19 maybe, yeah, I can't remember. It's one of those. Like,
There's a gold watch. I don't know. Something happens at 20. There better be something that happens at 20 years. So
Yeah, appreciate
for the
it.
record, I will not be here for 20 years. So Jeff's role more important than my role.
Well, if you talk to everybody, it's always funny. Every 5 years, I tell people this is my last year, and I'm going on 10 years or 15 years of saying it's my last year. So
All right. Well,
we're good.
As long as that's not true. So you came in more of a maintenance role. And before I forget, like, if there's anybody in the family left in construction, get them at it again. We need, what you described. This is going to be an aside. Hang with me, folks. What you described is what Duluth has to learn how to do again. Post World War II, we didn't build one house at a time. We built neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And, it was that, and, you can go to various parts of town where it's like, oh, those 10 houses look alike, because, like, they were all built at the same time. And, like, this one might have one dormer, this one has two, this one has none, but, we were knocking them all out. So what you described about your grandfather's business in the Heights, like, that's what we have to learn to do again, because we're growing again, but we don't have the housing, which makes the housing we have so darn expensive. So
Good point.
if
Good
there's
point.
Vukeliches out there still building stuff, like, send them my way. We'll get them hooked up. We'll find the land.
Sounds good, man.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So talk a little bit about the role that you're in now, and what that means and how that fits within the city system. I think when I think of core city services, which is something I'm really committed to, streets and utilities, top of the list. Like, it's kind of the classic, if we don't do it, is anyone else going to? Nope, like, streets and utilities belong to us. And then I did a video earlier this week where I tried to kindly remind people we live in winter. Like, come on, folks. It's Duluth in Minnesota on Lake Superior. And I know we haven't had a tough winter for a couple of years, and for the record, this one still isn't. But this is more normal than what we've seen in a while. But for a northern city, nothing is more core city service than snow removal. And it gets really nuanced, and I know we'll talk about that. But how do you and your leadership fit into all of that?
That's a great, really dynamic and great question. So I'll start off by saying it's not just me. First off, like, we have great managers in Chad Bednar, we have great supervisors in Ross and Bruce, and we have a great lead worker team. So we are, however, very small. I mean, when you look across the department wides, like, for what we have to do, we're lean and mean, right? So what I bring to the table on a lot of it is kind of the more, I don't like to use the word 50,000 foot view, because sometimes you miss details, and I'm a detail guy. I love it. But what I always try to do is back off a little bit, and anybody that's been in any type of municipal work understands there's a lot of reactionary items that you just have to do, right?
Yeah.
Well, the trouble is reactionary items are great. You need to work on your feet. You need to be able to adapt and move. However, you can't necessarily make decisions based on those reactive measures. And that's where I kind of come in. So we have to react to the snow, we have to do something, but we also have to pause and back up and say, well, did we treat this right? Should we treat this different? And then be able to analyze that at the end of the day. So that's a lot of what I do, and just kind of being able to kind of understand the systems, understand the dynamics of snow removal. And, for people, snow removal and core city services, like you said, specifically snow removal, I always feel that people forget because they feel like they can plow snow themselves, because they do. Think about it, right? And it's very polarizing.
Reminder, don't do it into city streets.
Right,
It's
there
not
you
helpful,
go. There you go. So inevitably for me, it's always like, if you look at our operations department that does plumbing, sewer, and gas, you as a homeowner, unless you have that type of background, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to call a professional, right? Well, how many people shovel and snow blow their own driveway?
Yeah, right.
A lot, right?
Good point, yeah.
Is there any big licensees that are needed to be able to plow snow? Not necessarily in the private sector.
Yeah.
So there's this overarching feeling that this is not skilled work. And in my career here, I've really tried to let people and try to learn, to get people to learn and understand these people are as trained and skilled operators as anybody you would see on a construction site, digging a hole, hooking gas lines together. We just have a different skill set, right? And the other thing that I think people forget about is we don't have the option to go over to the valve and shut it off. Right. Okay? There's one thing that everybody, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? Well, our operations folks do have a benefit that they can go over to the gas line and spin that off.
Sure.
Right? It's not what they want to do.
Yeah.
But the point is they are able to isolate what they're working on.
Yeah.
Because we deal with nature in every piece of our street maintenance, core city services.
Yeah.
We deal with nature, and nature doesn't have an off switch.
Yeah.
So we have to have a plan, and then plan to change, and then plan to adapt to that change, right? So we lay out very specific plans, but inevitably, if the storm shifts, if we see wind off the lake, if we have a high pressure push down, if the temperatures are weird, we have to adapt and change, and we may change everything.
Right.
And that timing in which those happens is where communication is important, like you've brought forth, and people have a hard time understanding this isn't shoveling your sidewalk. Yeah. This isn't shoveling your driveway or your neighbor's driveway or plowing the parking lot at a Target or a Kohl's. Right. We have to make sure that we have emergency services vehicles access up and down our P1, our Priority 1 network, so they can get to hospitals. And that ultimately is what makes it so dynamic, right? We have over 530 centerline miles, close to over 1,000 lane miles throughout town. And we have to make sure that we have emergency services vehicles that can get around, right? So we are very systemic in what we do, but the operation itself can adapt and change in a heartbeat. And
So
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think a couple things that you mentioned, several things that I want to try and keep track of, and I think a couple things I learned coming into the job, even with my background, having been a city councilor and been involved with city government for almost 20 years, was one, there is a system. It's a system approach. And what you just shared is something I've not really thought about before, how everyone's like, well, I can do that, and I can do it better than that, so I get the city, and we'll dig into a couple of things, because you mentioned some things that matter, P1s, P2s, P3s, the center line miles versus lane miles, but I really saw two things that you touched on that made a big difference for me in my first year in office. One was you pulled me into, we had a big storm spring of 24, March of 24. And so Geoff and some others from our team got together the Friday before, and I can't remember exactly when it hit, maybe about Wednesday of the next week. But folks, this guy is a weatherman. And not like Groundhog Day weatherman, but like Geoff could be on the Weather Channel. And we were in a conference room at City Hall, and you were literally laying the storm down for me, like it's coming down here and it's going to move up, and and there were like 3 different options depending on if it comes out over the lake, it's going to do one thing. If it's kind of right along the shore, it's going to do this. If it stays inland, it's going to do this. And so maybe take a minute to talk about, especially given Duluth's geographic proximity to the big lake, why it's so important to anticipate ahead of time what a storm might do, and then how that impacts the different scenarios you and the team have to set up.
Yeah. So what's very interesting, and this plays out outside of the city. So I'll start the whole thing by saying, if we ever notice why we see new weather forecasters all the time throughout our local media, they come here to train. Okay.
Because it's so dynamic.
It's so dynamic, right? We are the jumping point. I think everybody who watches any of the local medias can count how many weather people in a year, right? So the reason
you don't start in San Diego and figure out how to do dynamic forecasting.
Right on. So what for us, what's really dynamic, obviously, is the big lake, and there's two big things about Lake Superior that affect our weather. The first off is that it a lot of times doesn't freeze all the way. So when it doesn't freeze all the way, you have 32-degree water, which starts to pump moisture into the air.
Sure.
Right? So we already have a very saturated atmosphere because of the evaporation that is happening off the lake.
And if you want to be reminded, that's sea smoke, right?
Exactly.
That is all that, at this time of year, 32 is warm.
Exactly.
All that moisture, yeah.
Great point. So as that moisture starts to enter the atmosphere, you can basically think about it as I always tried to kind of simplify the weather and tell people, like, weather is like an animal, and what feeds that animal is moisture, right? And when it calms down, it's either cold or hot, right? So when you start feeding the atmosphere with moisture, and you get these low pressure systems that come in out of the south or the north, that moisture plays differently than anywhere else in the country because they don't have the biggest freshwater body, right? So the interesting thing for us is, and we have great partners at NWS. I want to point that out right off the bat. Joe Moore and the staff up there are fantastic. I talked to them a lot.
Don't lose this thought, but folks, if you're not following the National Weather Service Duluth office on socials, you are missing out. Like, they put out such good information, timely information. Like, we get emails with deeper briefings, but even just their socials are really helpful.
Great point. So I talk with Joe and the folks up there quite a bit because they are the professionals.
Yeah.
But what's fun for me, and it sounds really weird to say it's fun, but what's fun about that weather is it is probably one of the hardest math problems one can work, right? And because we try to be very structured in what we do in our snow removal, how and when and why that weather comes in is very important to us because the materials that we put down, the operations that we put out, a lot of times are based on snowfall, they're based on temperature. They sometimes are even based on the precipitation type. So is this a snow type? Is this a mixed type? Or is this a rain type, right?
Sure.
So the weather around Duluth is very dynamic.
Which this winter we've had all of. Right?
Yeah, right. It's been the mixed bag, right? So what's interesting that people will sometimes forget about is there's about 1,500 feet of elevation gain from like Canal Park up all the way into the upper part of Woodland.
Right.
And that whole thing happens in probably 2 miles.
Right.
So this is a very steep gradient, steep hill. So there's atmospheric conditions that happen, and I'm going to get a little nerdy, and I apologize to...
Please do, because otherwise, like...
And I apologize to any weather people if I misspeak, but there's a few things that happen in Duluth, and we always hear it, we always talk about it, but sometimes people don't realize it. So when they always say, it's warmer by the lake, right? Or it's colder by the lake. That is all dependent on season. It's warmer by the lake when we see temperatures drop below 32, and that water is still at 40, 45, even 50 sometimes in November, right? So it's warmer by the lake, a little bit of east breeze. So now we have this really warm air that sits down low.
Sure.
So then when you see these clippers come in from the polar jet outside, coming generally out of Canada and Saskatchewan, Manitoba, as that wind picks up and starts running over the hill, it's called compression heating. So as that wind runs across Woodland, Piedmont, and it hits our big hill and it drops, it speeds up. And when it speeds up, it creates heat. So that's called compression heating, right? So all of these factors play into, now let's sprinkle some snow on top of it, right? So Duluth has about 4 microclimates. And this is what we've found in my time here. And speaking with the NWS people. So we have downtown Canal Park, a little bit of lakeside is kind of one climate, right? That climate is severely affected by the temperature of the water because of its elevation to the water, right? That next kind of mid-climate happens from realistically about 3rd or 4th Street up to about 8th or 9th Street. Okay. That's a middle band. That band tends, in a normal event, if we have an east wind, which is blowing that warmer air, it's going to, warmer air makes that snow melt. So that's where you see that slush happen. So usually you'll see...
Also happens to be one of our steeper parts of town,
Exactly,
right?
Great point. So downtown you'd see rain. On that first little microclimate, you would start to see a little slush happening. And then as you move up towards the top, around that skyline, maybe even that Skyline Boulevard across, it starts to turn more snow. Then you get up into the woodland areas, the upper, up in Piedmont and up in Magny. That's when it's snowing.
Snowing hard, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Because that warm air can't get up top. Right?
Sure.
So what that means for the city operation is I have 4 different weather types that I have to try to battle. And through those 4 different weather types, we have 3 different priority levels of street.
Right.
Right? And we only have 41 staff, so we have to make sure we manage our resources enough. Because the other wonderful thing that happens here is we get a lot of stacked events or lake effect or lake enhancement, right? Mm-hmm. So what this means is if the lake wasn't there, that system would push off.
Right.
Low pressures are counterclockwise. They look like a big comma. So that's the easiest thing to remember about a low pressure system. Okay. So when that low pressure system comes in first, it's usually a warmer slug of air. Mm-hmm. So that's when you see that mixed precipitation downtown, maybe the snow up high. Mm-hmm. And then inevitably, as that starts to pass through, you're going to see they call wraparound moisture, right? And what that is that's the center of the low pressure system is now over like Milwaukee, Green Bay, over Lake Michigan. But the curl, the big hook, is now pulling air down from northern Ontario, which is very cold air, right? So now you have this very cold air coming down, and because it's counterclockwise, it's also pushing in east wind off the lake. Okay. Well, now our lake is at 40 degrees. We have a lot of warm air that is now meeting this very, very cold air. That's what's called lake effect or lake enhancement, right? Those lake enhancements, depending on if that low pressure system stalls, they can last 2 to 3 days. Right. Anybody that's lived here for any amount of time has known, well, the snow's gone, but it's still snowing. Right. And you wake up the next day and it's still snowing, right? It may, and that lake effect, mind you, is very low moisture content snow. So a moisture coefficient, which is the amount of moisture in the snow, when it is lake effect, is a lot higher, meaning 15 to 20 to 1. So 20 parts liquid to 1 part solid. Whereas if you see what are called Colorado lows, which form out of Colorado, that pulls Gulf moisture. You also see what's called panhandle hookers, and those come out of Oklahoma. Okay. Those are very deep southern low pressures that will draw all that moisture up. So those events have very, very low moisture coefficient, meaning it's 7 to 1 or 5 to 1. I think 2023, the blue snow, 22, I believe they called it the blue snow because it was so dense and wet. That was the winter of 22, 23. The first snowfall of 22, 23. The snow was blue. It had a blue hue to it. And that was the amount of moisture in that snow.
I got the bottom part to try and
oh my gosh, it was horrid.
Wet concrete.
Yeah. So the reason that weather is so important and it's become such a part of my life is if we can understand and try to at least predict what's going on, we have the auxiliary plan to our original plan. Sure. So we're not having to reset, restart, pull staff in, pull staff out, move equipment around.
Which, you alluded to it before, but it's so critical because, folks, we don't have a ton of people out there doing this. The equipment is expensive. And one of the things that the public doesn't get to see that I do is we get periodic reports throughout a snow event. And it talks about how many plows are out. It talks about how many are broken. It turns out that plowing is tough on equipment. Frankly, it's tough on people too. And so, pretty soon you get a major snow event that lasts a few days, and now you've got a couple vehicles that are down. So knowing all of that in advance or being able to anticipate what we expect to have happen and what could happen, I have to think helps you use your team and use that equipment to the best of your ability.
That's a great way of putting it. So I always when I have to respond to residents or talk to residents about our snow plowing, I always tell them our biggest problem we have is resource management. And the reason I say that is if we do not read the weather right and we don't understand the weather, and we blow up all of our staff in the first 16 hours, we have nobody for the next 32, right? So it's very simple to kind of look back and go, well, why aren't they out? Why aren't they out, right? Yeah. We want to put all of our staff out when we can make the biggest difference, right? So inevitably, the first parts of all these storms that come through, we're not making any progress. And the reason we're not is anytime we see snowfall, you hear them talk about 1/2 inch an hour. Yep. Okay. Anytime we see snowfall rates at a 1/2 inch an hour, we're not making any progress. Yep.
Literally just holding our own.
We're holding our own. And a lot of times if it's above that, we're falling behind.
Right.
But we still have crews out and we're still working. Now, some of the reason we do this is because, one, resource management.
Yep.
Two, we have to be responsible for the chloride and salt that we put out, okay? So chloride is a huge pollutant. And we have all our staff trained, smart salting trained through the MPCA. Our stormwater people, Ryan Granlund and Tom Johnson, they do a great job. We're tight with them. We work to make sure that we have one of the best water resources in the world.
Right.
We have to be the champion of it.
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
We have to be good stewards of the land and
Yep.
water. So when people say like, well, why don't you just go out there and dump a bunch of salt on it? Because even if we dump a bunch of salt on it, the amount of the speed in which the snow is accumulating, the salt isn't going to melt it. So we're going to need to plow that off before that salt actually works.
Yeah.
Meaning we're going to take all that salt we just put down and we're going to dump it right in the storm sewer,
Yep.
and that's going to shoot right into the lake,
Yep.
right? So when we have two types of plowing. We have final pass plowing, and then we just have keeping everything open plowing, right?
Right.
I don't know how else we don't really have a
Yeah.
word for the first one,
That's-
right? I'll just dub it. Like,
Keep it open.
Keep it open.
Yeah.
All we're trying to do is make sure that we can keep traffic moving. It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough. And I can't, I really try to stress when I talk to people, we live in a northern climate.
Yes.
Okay? What our parents, I'll speak for my generation, I'm in my mid to late 40s. Our parents' generation was prepared. They had snow chains, they had kitty litter,
Right.
they had everything, and they
Right.
made sure they had snow tires.
Right.
I
You didn't
can't-
leave the house without the snow emergency kit, right?
Right, yeah.
Because you just, like being a little older than you, like I can for sure I relate to that. And you had the experience of literally getting stuck somewhere and maybe stuck for hours, running out of gas maybe. So I know, like, and I don't want to dislodge you from your
Nope.
path because I
No,
see
no,
where
no.
you're headed with this, but it is interesting how that reality has changed of, like I need to be prepared if I'm going to leave I expect to leave my home at any time during any event and get where I'm going to go. And that is a fundamental change, I think, from 50 years ago.
Very well said, Roger. And to be honest, that's our number one. Beyond some of the other things I'm going to say are number one, because I'm going to say a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But realistically, I would really hope people realize that try to stay home. The best thing you can do that helps efficiency is do not go to Kohl's.
Yeah.
Do not go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
Do not go to your friend's house or the bar or a restaurant.
Yeah.
Stay home and let everybody go.
Yeah.
And the reason I say this is anytime we see, I call them a tough accident because I try to be positive and say it's not bad, it's just tough, right? So if we see tough accidents, side swipes, head-ons where people are getting towed, the first thing we're asked to do is go treat that intersection. Now, when we look at our entire plowing plan, we build in a little bit of time for these one-off accidents, right? But the more people that get into accidents, the more times I need to deviate trucks, right? So we're plowing a certain neighborhood, they're plowing P1s. Oh, somebody slid off over here, we got to send a truck. Oh, somebody slid off, we got to send a truck. When we pull those trucks away, it is at minimum 25 minutes. So we have 2 or 3 of those, we're looking at an hour and a half service delay.
Sure.
Right? And this is the reality of it.
Yeah.
And I don't think people understand, and we started the conversation this way, the dynamics of snow plowing.
Right.
It takes time to get from point A to point B. And I'll even preface that by saying when snow starts, like we try to mitigate the amount of times we go out because it's very, very, very expensive. So a lot of times if we have residual salt, if we see a little bit of warmer temps creeping up, we're not going to come out right away. We're going to let that traffic kind of warm it up, melt it off. If we think the storm's going to pass, we may wait a little bit. And we do that to be responsible for the amount of chloride that we're spreading, right? And also the giant cost to the taxpayers that it is to come out.
Yeah.
In a perfect world, if salt wasn't toxic and money didn't matter,
unlimited,
we'd be out all the time, right?
Yeah.
But that is not the reality we live in.
Yeah.
So kind of all of those things put together, like the residents of Duluth have the ability to help us increase efficiency by at least 10 to 15%.
Right?
Obey your regulations. Yeah. If you don't know your parking regulations, ask the questions.
Yeah.
We have great people in the parking. You have great counselors and representatives. All you need to do is call them and send
online,
an email.
It's easy.
Right?
Yeah.
No, you can't be 7 feet from an alley. No, you can't be 30 feet from an intersection. Our trucks are anywhere between 20 and 40 tons when we get into our motor graders. They're 45 feet long. We're trying to get these into 16 to 12 foot alleys.
Yeah.
Any room you can give us increases that efficiency, which gets you plowed out.
And I think so especially important in our core neighborhoods, which I live in, where houses are closer together, everything's more compact, the streets are a little bit more narrow. We were talking about a couple things that were so profound for me to understand your work better in my first year, and one was doing a plow ride-along. So, getting out there at 3 in the morning and plowing in the East Hillside really brought home to me something you were just saying, which was, number one, park where you're supposed to park. I say it every single time. Because we were going along on East 8th Street, you could look down the hill, and my driver was like, I'm not even going to try. Like, there's cars all over on both sides of the street. I will never get my plow through there. If I start, I risk getting stuck. And, you talked about, maybe a half hour to pull somebody off to go address a bad intersection, get stuck, now you're done. So friends, when you don't park where you're supposed to and your block or your street doesn't get done, it doesn't just impact you, it impacts your entire neighborhood, because now that plow is going to continue on its route, and that section's not going to get, you're going to come back around at the very end and take a look at it again. And I know I've told you this story, but I'll share it here publicly, of that entire ride along. The thing that was memorable was plowing on the upper part of Lake Avenue, and we go to make a turn on East 9th Street, and right away, cars on both sides of the street. And we're at 3 in the morning, it's snowing at I think an inch plus an hour, so limited visibility. And in the process of turning, the driver's got to go, well, I can't go. I can't continue down that street. I'm not going to make it, or I'm going to get stuck. So now we start backing down the upper part of Lake Avenue, and I'm in the passenger seat, white knuckling nothing, and we start to slide backwards down Lake Ave, and our plows throw grit down below them too in reverse. But this is what we ask our drivers to do in a city that Geoff described, geographically huge with 1,500 feet of elevation drop. So, to Geoff's point, to just worth reiterating, number one, park where you're supposed to, and number two, just stay home. We talked a little bit about the experience of prepping for a storm. One of the things we did this year was after the Thanksgiving storm, which was challenging. We did an after action and kind of walk through how did that go. Something, and I'll invite you to talk about that a little bit, but one of the things you mentioned in that after action was Thanksgiving falling in the middle of this multi-day event. And guess what? Everybody's out and about, right? I'm sorry, me too. Like, so we all made it worse. We all made it more challenging for our crew, and made it frankly longer because we were out and about and making it messier. So, I think those points are really important. Something I want to make sure I come back to is, so you mentioned number of centerline miles versus lane miles, and then you mentioned P1s, and I know we have P1s, P2s, and P3s. So why don't we talk a little bit about when we do get a snow event, what do those numbers mean? What's a 1 versus a 2 versus a 3? And how many trucks are out there at a time? Why aren't there 80 trucks out 24 hours a day for 3 or 4 days? So
yeah, great point. So first off, we prioritize our streets into 3 categories: P1, P2, and P3, abbreviated for priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. These streets we have a public facing map. So if anybody's concerned about where they live, what they do, it's on our website. You can look, you can find that out. So
But generally, the heavily trafficked streets, like that main artery through your neighborhood, probably a P1.
exactly. The best thing I always tell people is P1s are your connectors, right? So these are your London Road, Superior Street, Snively Avenue, Highland. These are your main feeds, right? These are the ones that go to hospitals. These are the ones that you see a lot of always in the summer, like semi trucks, dump truck. These are the trans. These are the transmitting lanes.
Yeah.
Your priority twos are usually all your neighborhoods. And the easiest way I tell people is if you don't have any centerline paint, so if you don't see white or yellow marks in front of your house, you're probably on a 2 or 3.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. Most of our priority 1 networks have paint on them.
Sure.
Right? Whether it's a fog line or whether it's a skip dash or whatever in the center.
Yeah.
For the most part, if you have paint out in front of you, you're probably a P1.
Oh, interesting.
Probably.
Okay.
There's a small percentage that aren't. But if you don't have any, you're
Yeah.
realistically probably a P2.
Got it.
Now, and then P3s are alleys.
Yeah.
So,
And some of our like dead ends and nooks and crannies, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
The smaller, less traveled, usually those have right-of-ways that or street widths that are around 16 feet.
Okay.
Our average residential streets are about 22 feet, and then our P1s are wider. We're up in like the 28s, depending on the lanes. So the priority is very, very important for people to understand, and we plow in Duluth a little bit different than other places. And the reason that we do that is we round all of our corners and we try to complete our network in a fashion that we do not leave snow in front of an already plowed street.
Okay.
So if you go down to the metro, you're gonna find that they just, what we call checkerboard or crisscross.
Okay.
So they're just gonna drive straight through an intersection, they're gonna drive straight through an intersection.
Okay.
They're gonna leave a windrow of snow.
Yeah.
And then the cars just roll over that gets scattered and melted. That is a very common way of plowing.
Okay.
City of Duluth rounds.
Man, I'm just like imagining if we did that.
Yeah, right.
The mayor line would be worse than it is.
So I always like to preface that, like, everybody always likes to say, these people do this, these people do that. Get into the nitty gritties of what those people are doing, because they're doing it completely different.
Yeah.
Not that it's wrong
Yeah.
or right.
It's choices.
It's their choice.
Yeah.
City of Duluth has chosen, since I've been here, to round all these corners. And the reason we do this, we try to make sure we exit all that snow. That does take time. But the reason that priority 1, 2s, and 3s come into play is we want to get all of our main network done first, so that if you do want to jump out of your unplowed area, you've got clear sailing on your ones, right? Once our P1 network is done, then we go to P2 network. And when we have the ability then to turn in off of all of our P1s and clean up all that snow, right? Then we move to our P3s, which is our alleys. So our goal is to make sure we deposit snow on the next priority level down, so that we can then clear it again.
Got it.
Right?
Okay.
A lot of people say, why don't you just drop all the plows and start plowing? Well, because we don't need access in an alley if it's snowing an inch an hour.
Right.
Right?
Right.
We need to make sure that ambulances can get to there.
Right.
And for people, a lot of concerns are always, what happens if I have a medical emergency? Oh my God, all you gotta do is call 911.
Yeah.
When you call 911, they call us, and I've been on these calls, I've plowed for these calls. They call us immediately and they say, 5888, Grandview.
Yep.
And that's what we do. We plow to that place to make sure you get your emergency services
Right.
vehicles. If we didn't have our P1s plowed, it's gonna be very difficult for them,
Right.
right? So there is a lot of thought and methodology behind our baseline plowing in our priority levels. The other thing that gives us the priority levels gives us an option of is we can either pull crews away from one priority to make sure we get one cleared, or the other cleared. We can focus in on a network to ensure that network is complete, depending on the severity and all this stuff. Everybody loves to mention the 2019 blizzard, and like I said, I've been here through a lot of blizzards, and the biggest struggle we had with 2019 was moisture content and the duration in which it snowed. And people got to remember, a lot of people like to compare snow to snow, and from a priority standpoint, we had all of our priority 1s open in that 19 storm. But where we struggled was the 2s were so heavily packed, such dense snow, that our trucks couldn't break through those windrows that I was telling you that we put in there. So we had to move. Normally, we have 22 motor graders and 25 plow trucks. At that point, over half of our fleet was useless. We could not get into those networks with our trucks. So we immediately were cut in half. So when you want to look at our network, right, our snow plowing ability, we were cut in half the next day, right? So this is the dynamics that I love to talk about, because I feel like it really hopefully will give viewers the understanding that it's not just like send a truck in there.
Right.
We sometimes cannot get through with a 20-ton vehicle. It will not make it through that snow. We have to use our motor graders, which are 40 tons, and those have chains on them. They have 6-wheel drive with chains and a V-plow. Sometimes that's what we need to get through there, right?
Well, and coming back to something you said earlier, it is so easy as a resident or business to be like, well, I got my steps clear, or I did the sidewalk in front of my house, which you should do. It is our responsibility. Well, why isn't the city? And you just explained. I mean, it could be any number of factors, but helpful for folks to know there is a ton of planning and intention behind everything we do. And I wanted to highlight something I know you've taught me, Geoff. The crews might be out there hitting in the P2s, the traditional no paint. I learned something new. Central line streets, and all of a sudden it starts snowing heavy again. We're back up over an inch an hour. Well, guess what? They're going to stop doing that and fall back to those main P1s, because we want to make sure that fire trucks and squads can get through. We want to make sure that our health workers can get to the hospitals. So it's not just about making sure that there's a path through your neighborhood. It's also about making sure that we're supporting critical services within the community, especially during a storm. You know, the last thing we want is an ambulance getting stuck, or a nurse or doctor not being able to get to the hospital. When you look at, and there's kind of a rhythm, right? I mean, we will, in a typical storm, which doesn't exist, but we'll have X number of sort of, the way we set up is east versus west. And how long can a driver be out there going until we need to give them some rest? And when they get rest, are we just done? Nothing's getting done, or is there still some?
Yeah, great question. So I think that this hopefully will shed a lot of light onto the complexities and dynamics that we deal with. So our what we call final plowing shift usually starts at 0200, so 2 a.m. Mm-hmm. We choose 2 a.m. to start most morning shifts because it takes our fleet roughly 5 to 8 hours to complete our P1 networks. Okay. So the goal for us is to ensure that we've at least got one complete round of our priority 1 networks before, I'll call it the Duluth rush hour, right? Yeah. It only lasts about a half hour, right. But if you're depending on where you are, right? Yeah, it might be 10 minutes. But the point is we want to make sure that we've got everything cleared by that morning commute by around 7 or 8 o'clock, because that's generally when that push of traffic comes. Now, beyond that, once we're done with that priority 1 network, in the wonderful event that there's no more snow, we're going to push into P2s. Yep. P2 network takes on average 8 to 12 hours to finish as a whole, right? Okay. So as you start adding these numbers up, right, now we're up to 20 personal time hours, not days, but staff hours. Yeah. Now, at that point, that's exhausted them between 12 and 16 hours. At that point, we shut them down. Right. We need them to get rest. It is unsafe for them to, keep operating heavy equipment at, 20, 30 hours behind them. Nope, that's not right.
Yeah, remember, folks, there are humans behind this thing, and it's a demanding job.
It's so true. So at that time, we take that shift of people and we send them home for 8 hours. And then the way that the clock kind of works is that 2 a.m. shift starts. They usually stop between 3:30 and 6:30. They go home, and then they come back in at 2 to 2:30. So that gives them 8 hours off to get home, get something to eat, go to bed, come back.
And during that 8 hours, we usually still have a couple plows out, 1 east, 1 west, right? Just trying to do some basic maintenance.
Yeah. So when we get into that, so the good thing for folks to realize is between that 6 to 11, 12, midnight, 1 a.m. hour is very reduced staffing. And people always say, well, why do you do that? Why do you do that? For 2 reasons. 1, our staff needs time to relax. Yep. 2, again, not discrediting people that work outside of traditional business hours.
Yes, but many.
Most people are home by 6:30. That rush hour in the afternoon happens between 3:30 and 5:30. Yep. So we are getting those people home. Yeah. Then we are relaxing ourselves. And
so if they can do one thing, it's in the evening on days when we're having snow events, especially in the evening, stay home.
Yep.
Because
And-
that's when we're lowest staffing and our staff are getting rested and getting ready to hit it
100%,
again.
Roger.
Yeah.
And honestly, those are a lot of the complaints I field are complaints that say, why aren't you out there in the evening? I'm trying to get to this. I'm trying
to go to the football
I go
game.
back to saying, then you should cancel.
Yeah.
Right? And you know what? I'm going to say it. A lot of the community groups, a lot of the other people need to be more winter minded. Don't hold these events. Maybe cancel, postpone. Because the last thing you want to do, God forbid, is have, you're traveling with your child and you get in an accident.
Right.
Because you thought that the sporting event or something was more important than the health and wellness of your children, right? So this is my ploy to everybody, is start to prioritize winter driving, because it happens quick and it happens fast.
Right.
I've been in many accidents as an operator. I've broken many pieces of equipment. I've been in many wrecks, and it's always the split second, and it's never you. And I can't, that's the thing people forget. It's never you. It's that other person, right? So,
one thing I want to make sure we touch on before we run out of time is snow emergencies.
Yes.
So I think a big learning for me was the advantage we have in Duluth of alternate side parking, and I know we've had other communities come and try to learn, like, how does this alternate side parking work? And what is it? What do the snow emergency signs mean that are all over town? Because we made a big change last year.
We did.
So let's talk a little bit about how a snow emergency works if one is called, and why we don't need them as often as other communities because of alternate side parking.
Sounds good. So, recap of how it works. So, it's declared by our public works director. He declares that. You've been in these meetings. He declares that with a lot of people in the room. This isn't made in a vacuum. There's a lot of people. So, because of alternate side parking, we're basically allowed to clear 2/3 of that street. So if you think of a normal street, you have a parking lane, you have a driving lane, and a parking lane. And I'm specifically speaking about our Priority 2 network. So these are your residentials. These are the non-painted streets you look out. So other communities, especially in the metro, they allow parking on both sides of the street, right? So when they don't have the ability to put snow away from a legally parked vehicle.
Right.
So they split it. So now you're forcing snow onto these cars. The easiest way I can give people an example is think of East 1st Street, East 2nd Street, East 3rd Street.
Right.
It is single-sided parking only.
That never changes.
And when you drive down there in a midwinter, all of a sudden it's 2 lanes, now it's a lane and a half, now it's 1 lane.
And the cars are like
Cars are 2 feet off the ground. Why? Because we can't maintenance it. The metro cities use snow emergencies to be able to clear those parking lanes. We don't have to do that. Where we struggle, because we have, on average, double the amount of average snow that the metro gets. Metro gets an average of like 48 to 52 inches of snow, depending on the averages. Duluth is anywhere between 96 and 102.
Right.
So we get double the amount of snow. So what we struggle with is snow storage. Right? And snow storage is the boulevard, is the green space, is these areas around the sidewalks. So our purpose of a snow emergency is when we start to see those snow storage areas diminish and we are not able to push back a lot of snow and we get a large volume of snow, we want to make sure that we clean everything up once so that people aren't struggling throughout the week, right? So it's more of a parking emergency than it is a snow emergency, right?
Well said.
So what the purpose of this is if you switch sides right now in an alternate side parking, you will be affected by a snow emergency. If you do not have to switch sides, you will not be affected by a snow emergency. And most of the time, we are not going to call a snow emergency during a snow event, right? That's the biggest thing people forget.
Because think, folks, of what we've talked, if we were to call a snow emergency during a snow event, what are we doing? We're asking you to get out and move your vehicle from where it's supposed to be. So it just made things worse. Like it is sort of the everybody out and about during Thanksgiving, except you're not actually going shopping. You're just like moving your car and moving the snow and making a mess. So I think I really want to stress that point because I get a lot of calls, no emergency. Well, because we have alternate side parking, because we're able to on a normal basis clear 2/3 of the street, it is not needed here the way it is in many communities. When it is needed is when it's, like you said, more of a parking emergency or snow removal emergency instead of a snow emergency.
Great.
So, generally the way I talk about it is day one, do nothing because we're hitting the P1s, right, where you're not supposed to be parked anyway. Day two, park where you're supposed to, and then day three, you'd move to the other side so that we'd be able to get at that park.
Exactly.
It really, the distance we are from the turnover also is a big factor, right? Because once we have people move to the other side of the street, that just freed it up so that we can come back and do that pass as well. So we didn't even talk about summer, and an hour has gone by already. This is, I told you folks, we started and said this is one of the most interesting people that we have on our team. I've loved getting a chance to know and work with Geoff. What I've wanted you to get out of this is an understanding that a lot goes into prepping for snow events in Duluth. A lot goes into executing on snow events. We make really good use of the folks that we have. I do want to say thank you to everyone who this winter has commented on the effectiveness of snow removal. It's meant that sidewalks have become more of an issue because we're doing a great job plowing. But okay, before we wrap up with Geoff Vukelich, we're going to end, if you're a regular viewer, a la sort of the Actors Studio, the 5 questions that we ask everybody. There are no right or wrong answers except for the wrong answers. So what is the best place to get pizza in Duluth?
Well, I'll try to keep it short here. If anybody knows me, I have a very ridiculous enjoyment of pizza.
Okay, I've learned so many new things.
Yeah, so I've traveled like pretty much Minnesota, Wisconsin, and some of the Dakotas and tried like mostly every pizza place I can. Doesn't matter what it is.
All right.
And then I grade them, and then I keep track.
Is this online? Can I go find this?
It's in my own notes.
All right.
Everybody gives me grief.
Okay.
But like the metro area, I've done, I love pizza.
Okay.
So, best pizza in Duluth, and I'm going to preface this by saying again, sorry to be a nerd here. When I value pizza, okay, it is dough, cheese, and sauce.
Okay.
Because you can cover up a lot of lower ingredients with fancy toppings, right? So if you make a good pizza, you should be able to order a cheese pizza, and it should be the best thing in the world.
Okay.
And the best one in Duluth, in my opinion, is Lulu's Pizza.
Okay.
Down on Michigan or Superior Street.
Interesting.
Yep. Because if you order just a cheese pizza, they make their own dough. It's sourdough. They make it every day. They cure it in their place. He makes his own sauce.
Okay.
Connor has such attention to detail with his food. It's amazing. So they're number one. There's a
lower
lot of great.
Lower side of Superior by Maurice's, right?
Yep, literally across the street from Maurice's. Yep.
Right.
So that's my favorite joint. There's a lot of good places in Duluth. I'm not crapping on other.
What about the Thanksgiving pizza at Shamrocks?
Well, honestly, I'll go. See, now you're in a different category. Right now we're in the novelty pizza,
All right.
And which I will say every year I go over and get one from Shamrocks.
I do too.
But
the first time I heard of it, I'm like, this sounds disgusting.
Yeah.
And then I was forced to go 2 years ago, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And now it's an annual thing.
It's not in Duluth, but honorable mention to the North Shore Pizza Cafe in Two Harbors. They're my number 2 in the area. So.
Okay. All right. Do we have such strong feelings about donuts and ice cream?
I mean, that's just a push situation. So, I've never run into a bad one, to be honest with you.
Do you have a preference? Is it donuts or ice cream?
Well, there's this. I'm a food guy. I didn't get this framed by not eating. If you really want to know, Roger, I take a Krispy Kreme donut and you cut it in half, and you put it on a flat top, and you fry the glazed side, and then you put a slab of ice cream in between it, and you put the donut back on it, and you fire it in you.
I need a minute, folks. As you know, I'm donuts and ice cream.
Super healthy. Let my cardiologist know. He's happy. Yeah.
Because somebody had brought back from New York the idea of taking a glazer from like Johnson's and then getting Love Creamer and putting it in the middle
100%.
and having and I'm like, why is this not a thing yet? And you just went beyond that.
Here's the real deal. Get yourself a pint of ice cream, and then you cut with a serrated knife through the pint of ice cream, and it's the perfect waffle
Sure.
that fits on the donut.
All right.
So
This is
make sure you go for
This is
it.
going to be a weekend activity at my house. So I am not a foodie, but I'm donuts and ice cream. So favorite annual Duluth event? Like,
Oh man, that's a tough one. You know, for historical reasons, I'm going to go with the Bear Grease.
okay.
I spent, I was president on the board, and I was on that for many years of my life.
So how does the changing weather patterns impact?
So the funny part is that's how I got into weather.
Okay.
Because when I was really heavy into it, we started to see a weather pattern change up here,
Yeah,
and I
right.
was chasing snow.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was chasing it up by the border, and then I chased it to Alaska.
Okay.
But it affects them. I mean, you can see every year they're postponing. They're running
Yeah.
out of two harbors.
I mean, hopefully this year.
Hopefully, knock
Yeah.
on wood, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's
Okay.
a big deal.
We've talked Duluth one end to the other. Do you have is there a view spot that is your go-to, or when you're out and about, you're like, oh man, that is the quintessential Duluth view?
So it's a great question again, man. So I'm going to give you two, and I don't know if, full disclosure, I don't know if the one exists anymore because I haven't been there. But on Orange Street, south of Arlington Avenue, there was a pressure relief, the way that our pumping stations worked, that pressure relief water off. And there would be a glacier that forms every year.
Okay.
And it was a frozen iceberg that would get 35 feet tall by 50 feet wide. It was
Okay.
this huge glacier.
Okay.
And the reason they did that is because I think it was like the pressure coming up the hill, it needed a relief. And
Sure.
so you would go there in the wintertime, and there would be a literal 3-story house of ice in the woods.
Okay.
So that was like one of the things I was like, you just don't see this everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's one. And
Okay.
then to be honest with you, like it sounds really weird, but like I love looking out towards over by Snively, or not Snively, Magny.
Yep.
And looking in towards the estuary.
Oh yeah.
So
back
I'm a
towards
big-
the Thompson Dam.
Yeah, so I'm a big
yeah.
historics guy. So like all I look there and see is like what it would look like if the reservoir wasn't there. Like
Yeah, right.
it's probably some of the most wilded area pre-development next to the Pac Northwest. Like
Yeah.
it's a really neat spot.
No, that climb to Ely's Peak and then looking back over the St. Louis,
Yeah.
the valley, that really, and for me, I love history as well. It reminds me that like this is actually where Duluth began.
Yeah.
It's where you first had the intersection of the native people and the early explorers. It was back in the foot of the estuary. It wasn't the big lake. It was, so you can sort of see all that history.
Yeah.
Well, maybe related, maybe not. Like when folks come to visit, hey Geoff, I'm in Duluth. Like, what do you take them to see? What is your?
It's so dumb. It's so dumb, Roger. I always, people are like, oh, this is such a neat town. And I always preface going, 80% of our infrastructure is normal. 20% of our infrastructure is 3% grade and higher. So I drive them up 5th Avenue West off of 4th Street.
Yeah.
And then we'll go over to Goat Hill off of 3rd and New Street.
Okay.
And we'll drive up and down those roads in the winter. And people look at you like, what is wrong with this town? Like, why don't you just shut this stuff off?
You point out the wooden sidewalks that we maintain
100%,
because it's the only way people can get to
And
the
then we'll go to
house.
2nd West above 4th Street, and we'll go look at the cobblestones from 1950.
Oh, neat.
Or, the round cobbles. And,
Yeah.
so like, I love history, and Duluth it's an old city.
And to see how that history plays into our actual municipal infrastructure, I
neat.
think is fascinating. I live in Ob Hill, so that Goat Hill section is a favorite of mine as
Yeah.
well. And, to talk about how streets were named things like Diamond and Park Place and New Street, so that immigrants coming off the boat at Ellis Island and were being sold parcels right on the spot would be like, oh, that sounds amazing. I want to live on Diamond Avenue, and then come and be like, wow, what did I do? So
That's fantastic.
well, thanks, man. This has been, as I expected, super fun conversation that absolutely flew by. We didn't touch like 9/10 of what I had thought we might be able to get to, but Duluth, as you can see, we have just amazing, interesting, fascinating people that work for the city of Duluth that are super committed to our most basic core city services, streets and utilities, snow removal. Geoff, so appreciate you taking the time to visit with me today and for all you do for the city. Not just saying it for our conversation, but one of the most interesting people that I've gotten a chance to know, and one of my favorite city employees. So thanks for being with us today, and stay tuned for the next time we have another episode of Welcome to Duluth.